Thor Ragnarok is an embarrassing sequel to the first two Thor movies. From the first trailer, I never understood the appeal of taking Thor in this direction, but I also tried to enter the film with an open mind, partially with me being a huge MCU fan, but especially with the Rotten Tomatoes score exploding in freshness. When I first saw it, I convinced myself that it was energetic enough, but now I have to come clean and explain why this film simply didn't work for me. The first Thor doesn't entirely hold up against some of the MCU's Phase 3 entries, but it's nevertheless an essential and well-crafted entry. For one thing, it's the first Marvel movie to feel like an expansion, exploring new worlds with new characters as well as new possibilities for stories and mythology and, more to the point, new styles of filmmaking. We weren't just limited to the slick, polished, technology-driven style of the first two Iron Man movies. Now, a Shakespearean filmmaker like Kenneth Branagh can deliver equally entertaining stories in a humble, elegant style, and such a style made Thor an honorable and inspiring superhero. It was great seeing Thor go through this smooth and well-paced character arc where he has to understand that his godhood isn't handed to him on a silver platter and put others before himself in order to regain his powers and return home, and even then, reject the throne simply because he has humbled himself. For the longest time, Thor was my favorite superhero because of this film. It left that much of an impact. The sequel, Thor the Dark World, wasn't as impactful of a follow-up, not holding very many striking character moments or as enticing of a villain. Granted, very few can top Loki, but that's still no excuse to give us this bland of a villain. At the very least, though, it had at its core the essential style of an elegant fantasy adventure nailed down. The director this go-around was Alan Taylor, known for his work on Game of Thrones, and while his craft for great TV work shows to be a slightly clumsy transition into film, it can still deliver gorgeous imagery mainly on Asgard. Yes, the Dark World looks pretty ugly, but I think that was part of the point. It's a world the Dark Elves aren't supposed to see because their natural inclination is towards darkness. And yes, the humor is pretty cringeworthy, but it doesn't overpower the rest of the experience because, much like the first film, there's an excellent balance between humor and drama. In both films, each humorous moment is followed up by a moment of character development.
This drink, I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
What was that?
It was delicious. I want another.
Well, you could have just said so.
I just did.
No, I mean, ask nicely.
I meant no disrespect.
All right, well, no more smashing. Deal?
You have my word. Jane.
Sorry, I just needed to make sure you were real.
I am. Jane,
Where were you? You said you were coming back.
I know, but the Bifrost was destroyed. The 9 realms erupted into chaos. Wars were raging, marauders were pillaging. I had to put an end to the slaughter.
As excuses go, it's not terrible.
They don't linger on the humor too long because they know what their purposes are. They're here to show us a god's ascendance into kinghood, and this film continues that with a sense of elegance and sophistication for the most part. As for Ragnarok, I never fully got where people were coming from when they said Thor was better when he was funny. He had his quips here and there, but for the most part he was elegant and noble, and even when he wasn't, the previous movies, including the Avengers movies, knew to keep that his focus.
Loki is beyond reason, but he is of Asgard, and he is my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
And nothing in those movies suggested that the comedic rock album tone that Ragnarok went for was at all his style. Think about the trajectory of Thor's development once you throw in Ragnarok. He goes from a prince who had to earn his place in Asgard to a warrior that learned that there was more to do for the universe than just watching it pass by on a throne, to a buffoon who talks to skeletons, talks to Doctor Strange as a teenager, and screams like a little girl. Just watch these scenes side by side and tell me if they match tonally at all.
There will never be a wiser king than you. Or a better father.
You are now meeting the Grand Master.
I'd rather be a good man than a great king.
Is this my son I hear, or the woman he loves?
It's just strange seeing this franchise go from the director of Hamlet to the director of Game of Thrones to the guy behind a few episodes of The In-Betweeners. The only compelling argument that I've heard is that as a Thor movie, it's jarring, but as an MCU movie, it makes sense because of the tone that Guardians of the Galaxy presented. But there's two major problems with this argument. One is that even Guardians of the Galaxy had some tone issues with its second movie, but the other problem is it still feels incredibly forced for Thor, even though it doesn't necessarily have to. The idea of dragging Thor out of his element into a place where he's seen as a toy is actually not that bad of an idea for converting Thor into a comedy. But the problem is that they change his personality so early on that the transition is practically non-existent. How early on, you may ask? In the freaking opening. First of all, how dare they just scroll up to Thor in a prison cell when the previous movies have proven time and time again that he is the reigning king of entrances. Second, if the idea is for Thor to transition to a new style, have him actually transition into that new style. Take the first Shrek, for instance. When it came out, everyone was used to animated fantasies playing out in a humble and enchanting way. Shrek wanted to look at the genre in a more raunchy and satirical angle, but it needed to prove that it understood why audiences loved the genre to begin with. So it opens in a humble and enchanting atmosphere with a storybook and a story of a princess with a curse locked in a castle awaiting for her Prince Charming. And then our lead rips off the page, calls BS on such an idea, and uses the page as toilet paper. It doesn't just throw us into the new style, but rather paves a smooth path to it. Thor Ragnarok, on the other hand, is in such a hurry to get to its new goofy rock album style that it doesn't waste a breath trying to remember that it's coming off the heels of a humble, elegant fantasy series. I mean, the first shot of Thor consists of him talking to a skeleton like it's an opening narration. The first two movies opened up, aside from the first movie's mystery hook, with a backstory from Odin setting them up as these mystical mythology stories. I'm not saying this film has to stick to that style, but what I am saying is that the film disrespects those who enjoyed the first two movies but not allowing them to warm up to this new style. To illustrate my point, allow me to edit together an intro that does a better job of transitioning from the old style into the new style.
I've been having these terrible dreams of late. Asgard up in flames, falling to ruin. You, Surtur, are at the center of all of them.
Then you have seen Ragnarok. The fall of Asgard. The great prophecy.
Hang on. I'll be back around shortly. Do I really feel like we were connecting there? Yeah. Okay, so Ragnarok. Tell me about that. Walk me through it.
It would have to cut out that son of a joke.
Surtur, son of a you're still alive.
But that's a worthy loss. Word of advice, if you're going to follow up two of the MCU's most noble and mature films with a film mostly focused on comedy, at least make it mature comedy. Not jokes written by a kindergartner. Oh, tee-hee, Surtur's crown looks like a big eyebrow. That's certainly an observation. Oh, haha, this guy mispronounced Texas. That would be so hilarious coming out of a 5-year-old. Oh, how cute, this guy's talking to a dead person only to realize that he's dead. That's not overly dumb. Oh, listen, he called the Hulk the stupid Avenger because when you add the word stupid to anything, it's automatically a mockery and therefore hilarious. Look, you can taser Thor all you want, but in the end, Ed Helms did it better.
We know each other. He's a friend from work.
I never found that line funny. It's like a Jerry Seinfeld line in a Thor movie. The only character that seems consistently funny is Loki, but that's mostly because he gets dragged from his high and mighty throne into being the target for a ton of physical comedy. Which is what I think they were going for with Thor as well, but they keep throwing in this painfully forced comedic dialogue that seems less natural to the character or any of the other characters, and more like the director and or producer most likely saying, "Hey writers, we need to take Thor in a comedic direction, so write funny stuff." And so they kept writing the first dialogue that came to mind when following the plot structure, clearly showing how little humor there was to get out of Thor to begin with. Taika Waititi's follow-up film Jojo Rabbit, which he wrote as well as directed, was so much funnier and more well-balanced, so maybe if he had been involved in the writing process, it would have turned out funnier. As is, though, it's simply a mess. Thor Ragnarok, while not the worst MCU movie, is easily the most embarrassing MCU movie. Well, okay, one of the most embarrassing MCU movies. It takes a mighty MCU hero off his high horse and throws him onto a donkey. It disrespects everything that the previous Thor movies worked so hard to establish for the character and thrusts him into a mess of immature comedy, confusing tones, and a mockery of the character. And thank God the following Avengers movies got him back on track. For the most part. Because if he stayed on this trajectory, I would have to deem him unworthy. It can have all the dazzling visuals, well-constructed action, and awesome villains at once. It's still, in my mind, one of the low points for the MCU. But that's just my opinion. Let me know your thoughts on Ragnarok as well as the rest of the Thor movies, whether you agree or disagree with me, down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more great content, and be sure to join me this weekend as I will be seeing Thor Love and Thunder and be doing a quick review for y'all. I'm CM Waters, and I'll see you soon.